In Canada, one woman is killed in a violent act every other day. The spike in domestic violence that began during the pandemic is still on the rise. Numbers in Canada have leapt by 27% since 2019, and in Israel, the situation is just as critical, with 16 Israeli women already murdered this year. True to its mission, CHW is stepping up to support emergency services in Canada and Israel at this critical time. Help CHW empower victims of domestic violence by supporting the 27-hour SOS crowdfunding campaign. From August 22nd to 23rd, every dollar will be quadrupled when you donate online at chwsos.ca.
From coast to coast, newsrooms to schoolrooms, a new sensation is gripping workers across Canada.
Solidarity!
In recent months, Canadian workers organized and walked off the job in droves. Ports in British Columbia, teachers in Nova Scotia, liquor and lotteries in Manitoba, Metro grocery stores in Ontario. They all hit the picket lines this summer, indicating a reversal in the long decline of union power.
Because the workers united will never be defeated. The workers united will never be defeated.
CJN reporter Alex Rose walked the picket lines outside TVO, Ontario's public broadcaster, to hear firsthand.
I'm Kara Stern. I'm a producer on The Agenda with Steve Paikin. I'm also the branch vice president for the union that is on strike right now.
And what's your name? What do you do at TVO?
My name is Wojtek Schemberg, and I've been at TVO since the late 70s.
So, Kara, why are you on strike?
We're on strike because we've had 10 years of real wage decreases. We've never gotten anything over 1.5 in the last 10 years, including 3 years of total wage freezes. So there's a wage element. There's also job security. TVO wants to basically dismantle job security at TVO. They want to make it that right now, after 2 years, if you're on contract, you become staff, and they want to get rid of that, and they're offering nothing in exchange.
And besides, imagining that using woke language, they'll be able to make TVO look progressive. When it comes to actually dealing with people who work at TVO, they've shown themselves absolutely incapable and incompetent at understanding our reasons for why we are pissed off.
This is one of the things that we've been frustrated with. They're very big on, like, we care about diversity, we care about equity. And I'm like, okay, start in your own house. Why don't you care about equity among your workers? Why don't you, when you get benefits and you go to the dentist and you know that it's going to be paid for, why are you now fighting us to say that other people don't deserve to be able to go to the dentist either? Like, one thing that I've been fighting through the union is that TVO hired this company called the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion to give us our diversity training. They came and gave us a presentation where they said, they had a list of like the top 10 atrocities committed by white people against minorities, and the Holocaust did not make the list. And we were like, hey, what's going on with that? And they're like, well, Jews, you can't be racist against Jews. Jews don't matter in this situation. I've made a big stink about it. I've talked, we had an all-staff meeting. I stood up and said, they said, we want to make sure everyone feels included. And I said, as long as you're still using that company, as long as you're still doing that, I do not feel included.
This is the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. I'm Zach Kaufman, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, August 30th, 2023. Today on our program, in honor of Labor Day, I speak to Rabbi Shalom Schachter, a former labor lawyer who's worked with the Ontario Nurses Association and the Canadian Union of Public Employees. We speak about the long history of Canadian Jews and the labor movement, from their days of leadership when Jews dominated the shmata business, to the place of Jews in unions today, what economic and political forces are behind the recent emboldening of workers, and what it may indicate about the future of work. All that coming up.
Beth David Hebrew School is now accepting new students. One of Toronto's most dynamic, egalitarian, conservative congregations is offering personalized Hebrew lessons, hands-on learning, exciting field trips, and small group activities, all with a hot dinner included. This is Jewish exploration that will last your children a lifetime. Classes run weekly on Monday nights from 5 to 7:15 p.m., starting September 18th. To learn more and enroll, visit bethdavid.com or email Adina, that's ADINA, at bethdavid.com.
As I mentioned at the beginning, there seems to be a lot of action in the union and labor world. Unions are feeling emboldened and are willing to strike and are in a more confident stance. Does that idea of labor movement renaissance resonate with you, or do you think it's an overly rosy description?
Well, it's the economic changes that have led to heightened assertiveness at the bargaining table. When there is high levels of unemployment, when it's easy for employers to replace striking workers are more cautious about running the risk of losing their employment. So that's one thing. The significant increase in the cost of living, keeping in mind that for decades already, average wage increases were below the cost of living. And now with the jump in the cost of living, that effective pay cut in people's disposable income is far greater, and therefore more urgency in trying to reduce that wage loss. And as well, the recognition that during COVID, there was a better appreciation of the importance of average workers, people who couldn't work from home, who had to come in day after day, expose themselves and their families to contagious disease in order to deliver important public services, whether it was simply grocery workers so people could have food on the table, or healthcare workers so that whether in hospital or long-term care, people would get the care they needed. And that hasn't translated in the renewal bargaining for employers to extend that tachlis way to people's working conditions and compensation. And just in terms of the port workers, there's threats to their job security through automation. Similarly, with the actors and writers strike, with artificial intelligence.
You might think that it would not be a good time for unions because of the increasing presence of gig work. This is a time when people talk about feeling a lot of social alienation. And I would think that the sort of individuated nature of a lot of workplaces would actually be bad for unions. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
There are sectors where workers have had to continue working side by side, and whether that's the ports or the grocery workers or otherwise. And those victories and the courage that these workers are manifesting is a signal to the workers that you've been identifying, the gig workers, that they too can benefit from solidarity. This is an issue that doesn't just affect the non-Jewish world. Many Jewish families have children who have gone to university, who have received their degrees and even post-graduate degrees, and have a very difficult time finding positions in their field. And even where they succeed in finding it, they are only gig workers, contract workers. For example, universities are really reducing the number of tenure-track positions and hiring only contract workers, which pay much lower. And therefore, people are staying home with their families longer, delaying marriage longer, delaying family formation longer. This is an issue that should be of interest to the Jewish community as well as to the general community.
One moment where people started paying attention, especially in Ontario, to workers' rights was last school year, where the Ford government threatened to use the notwithstanding clause. Do you think that moment has had a prolonged galvanizing effect?
Absolutely. And I want to keep the focus on labor issues in Canada, but I do feel it's appropriate to make an analogy to what's happening across the ocean in our homeland in Israel. Governments make decisions all the time. Sometimes we like them, sometimes we don't. But when they completely want to disrupt and overturn the very basics of society, that becomes an issue more than dollars and cents, but of democracy. And some governments in Canada, and in particular the government in Ontario, felt that they could short-circuit the process. And workers between the public sector and the private sector recognized the threat to the future of democracy and got support from the public, who also shared in this concern and forced the government to back off.
You are a rabbi and deeply engaged with Judaism. Can you talk a little bit about where workers' rights and Judaism, at least for you, feels like it intersects, and how that interplay?
So this interview is taking place, bashert, not just before Labor Day, but on the 8th day of the month of Elul. So last week's Parsha was Shoftim, and this week's Parsha is Kiteitzei. And in both Parshiot, there is some guidance. So in Shoftim, it starts off, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof. You should pursue justice, and that applies to people in authority, not just to judges, but they extend it to officers. So, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, how would this apply to corporations? They have to pursue justice. So I would say a just rate of profit, just return on investment, but a just price for their goods, and not to rip off consumers. And in Kiteitzei, at the end, there is some guidance on how to treat workers. Ve'elav hu nosei et nafsho. You have to pay a worker on time because his life depends on it. And we have some guidance from the Rambam as to what the highest level of tzedakah is. And the highest level of tzedakah is to give people the tools they need to be self-sufficient. And from my perspective, that means that we should press for laws that extend collective bargaining rights to all workers, and to have those rights meaningful, to allow them to negotiate decent collective agreements. I would hope that at the very least, that Jewish institutions would be a model for other employers. But so far, I haven't seen those institutions provide their workers with a living wage and sufficient staffing to make the workload manageable, and to ensure that those who are dependent on those services are receiving them in a timely and adequate manner.
Certainly, the Jewish community sees itself as certainly in the early 20th century, is very tightly associated with fighting for workers' rights. As Jews have gone into more white-collar, less unionized industries, that relationship has significantly degraded over time. And also, for modern Jews, there's certainly a perception that Israel is a big stumbling block, where in recent years, unions have passed a number of resolutions that are in solidarity with Palestinian rights, that is seen as Israel critical. And for a lot of Jews, that feels alienating.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to address these questions, because there's a great deal of misapprehension in the Jewish community about them. So first, I wouldn't underestimate the number of Jews who are involved in the labor movement, who are progressives in other areas, whether environmental areas or others. It's just that they don't engage in this involvement, identify themselves as Jews. I think that the Jewish community that's concerned with continuity and where the next generation of leaders for Jewish institutions is going to come from is stabbing themselves in the back by not finding ways to open up their institutions to these younger Jews and say, there are Jewish values that are consistent with your values, and you can pursue them as Jews and not just as members of the community. It used to be that the Jewish community leadership would maintain relationships with all political parties And there was a reason for that, because they didn't want Jewish issues of concern to be partisan. They wanted to be able to have supporters in each political party that would understand those issues and advocate for them. And unfortunately, possibly connected to the ending of Canadian Jewish Congress and that limited but still manifest democratic connection to the Jewish community, and instead going to a more donor-based direction, for whatever reason has seen fit not to maintain relations with, for example, the New Democratic Party, and even to ally themselves in a very close way with the Progressive Conservatives, and leaving even connections to the Liberals tenuous. I think that hurts the Jewish community. As for Israel and the labor movement, again, there is a direct relationship, I believe, between the defeat of the labor government in Israel and the ascension of Likud. Beforehand, the Histadrut, the Israeli labor movement, had sufficient resources to be able to participate in the International Labor Organization forums and maintained very good supportive alliances with most other unions. And when the labor government lost and resources were taken away from the Histadrut, they could no longer participate in these international bodies, and that left a vacuum that the Palestinians were very effective in filling. So part of my work in the Canadian labor movement is to try and challenge unjust criticisms of the Israeli government. I mean, every government may engage in policies and actions that should be opposed, but that doesn't mean that the country doesn't have the right to exist, and some forms of anti-Zionism can intrude into anti-Semitism. I might indicate that when I first started with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, at the time there were some of their leaders who were quite anti-Israel, and they have every right to express their policies publicly. But we had a staff meeting in which, again, we're dealing with collective bargaining issues, representation of worker issues in Ontario. You know, we're not an international body that's dealing with, human rights issues, elsewhere. This was a internal staff meeting, and one of those anti-Israel leaders got up and expressed his diatribe. I went to the microphone. I was a new employee, still on probation, and said, as a worker for QP, I'm entitled to a harassment-free workplace. And I was supported by my colleagues, by the supervisors and leaders of my employer. So I think it does take a little bit of courage to stand up when these things happen, but you'll be surprised how much support you get if you do. We have to, as the prophets did, speak truth to power, and to if we really want to achieve messianic days right here on earth, we have to not be afraid to challenge those who speak one way and act another.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. We're a proud member of the CJN Podcast Network. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman. Thanks for listening.
Jewish comedy legend Modi and Hasidic rapper Nissim Black are coming to Toronto to perform live at UJA's campaign launch on September 7th. Visit jewishtoronto.com to get your tickets today. Don't miss Modi and Nissim Black on September 7th. Go to jewishtoronto.com for your ticket today.